Hello and welcome to Narrow Gauge in the Garden, and in this episode we're looking at weathering. Now, one of the things that really keeps people engaged with their modelling is all the little conundrums it throws up. All those little questions that you spend hours thinking about, how do I do this, that or the other? And you only have to go on the internet to see the forums and the discussion groups that spend hours discussing how to get such and such just right. And probably one of the most difficult things of all is this issue of weathering. And one of the reasons I haven't weathered many of my models is I'm just not confident that the outcome is really going to look right. In the garden, you've got so much where Mother Nature does a superb and a subtle job of weathering, and the big worry is really that I'm going to put something out there that is just going to glare in the landscape and not look as though it is integral with the weathering of the rest of the model. So, I mean, we've got in front of us here a couple of commercial models which are very much as they came out of the box. They're actually a couple of the first things I ever bought before I got interested, I suppose, in making my own. They don't see a lot of daylight these days, but they are pretty much as they came out of the box. And, you know, compared with what you could buy commercially a year or two ago, I mean, they're fantastically well detailed, aren't they? One of the things that perhaps I have a little reservation about is plastic rather than the timber and metal and so on that I would really like to see. But, you know, for the price and, as I said, availability compared with a few years ago, you can't fault them.
Oh, absolutely
as
not.
Models.
They're accurate, aren't they, in the sense that they've got all the rivets there. But, for example, if you look at the inside of the open wagon, it's exactly the same colour as the outside. I think in real life, if you look at the history books, the companies did not paint the inside of wagons. They had no reason to. The outside was painted to give a sort of a company livery, a company. Mine's gone blank, but it gives a company look to the world. Whereas the inside was left plain timber and was affected by the loads that it carried.
It would actually get a lot of knocks and bashes and bumps anyway, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
So that probably just the pure pain and expense of having to paint the interior up all the time, they just didn't bother.
No, so you could say there that even if the exterior is accurate, the interior is immediately inaccurate because it's been coloured the same.
So what we've got on my left, of course, is pretty much the same two wagons.
Identical, with them. The same two models. But what I've done is I've carried out weathering to them. A lot of people, in actual fact, don't recognise the fact that they are Accicraft wagons when they're running in a train.
I mean, one of the things, of course, we're going to get into, I mean, having said just how great those wagons are, is perhaps we're beginning to see the same rolling stock cropping up frequently from layout to layout, feature to feature and so on, simply because they are so good. Yes. And the question perhaps also is that how do you make them a little bit more personalised? And perhaps weathering is one way of doing that, because you've turned really a bog standard commercial product into something that's very much personal to you and your outlook and your railway, isn't it?
That's a very good point. We've taken it the next stage, which is, as you say, is to personalise it. And if you carry that out, then you're going to get differentiation between the various lines, which is good. For example, the livery. As soon as you put paint onto it, it's going to differentiate it from the original.
And in fact, what we have here, of course, I'm sure everyone will recognise, is a couple of Linton and Barnstable prototypes. But because your line is actually its own self, you've been able to move something that is a prototype replica into something that is customised to your line. So you've got the basic model there, very convenient and so on, but it's now peculiar, if you like, to your line as well.
The first thing is it's got my company colours on the rolling stock. All my goods stock has the same sort of colour scheme, which means that wherever I buy it from, whatever manufacturer it is, it's got, if you like, a cohesive fleet look, because it's carrying the same livery, which is what the real railways did. They might buy wagons in from different manufacturers, but they always carry the same livery.
Well, Andrew, I've bought my locomotive. I've spent a lot of money on it. It's my pride and joy. I might have in the back of my mind, of course, the fact that one day there's a resale value issue. Convinced me that I actually need to slap a load of muck on it.
Well, that's asking for a lot, isn't it? I certainly went through that process. I mean, my first locomotive I've never weathered. But what happened was I started moving into the American railway side. Brambright brought out the Liberty Bell and Roundhouse brought out the Forney. And as soon as I looked at those, they screamed to me model. For example, the cab of the Liberty Bell was purporting to be timber, but only had a very sort of basic amount of wood in it. So I started adding wood to the cab. And when I'd done that, I thought, well, in actual fact, that cab would look better with a little bit of weathering on it. And it just went from there. And I took the view that, yes, there's a risk if I wanted to sell it, but I've never yet sold one of my locomotives. They're like my children, and I think I would take that risk.
So one of the big problems, of course, that dilemma is if you're going to put these models outside, which of course is what they're mostly intended for, you've got Mother Nature to compete with. There is a school of thought that says, well, if I take my model outside and I run it, it's going to pick up a few knocks and bumps, it's going to get a bit dirty, I might forget to bring a wagon or two in, they're going to sit in the siding and nicely rust, why bother to do anything else? You know, isn't real nature working on the rolling stock just the same as getting real nature to work on your track, working on the buildings? Obviously the vegetation takes care of itself. Why give Mother Nature a hand?
I think you're looking at materials. Let's say, for example, if you put outside a plywood wagon, my betting is that fairly quickly moisture will get in and you'd start to get the plywood peeling, separating. That's not weathering. So the problem is, yes, it would be weathering in the real world, but in the model world it would look totally different.
So in other words, what you're really saying is that that weathering doesn't scale down too well.
I think that's absolutely right. I think buildings, particularly plastic buildings, you can leave to weather to a certain extent, but I think rolling stock is a little bit too fragile to leave to Mother Nature's work.
And I think certainly some of the shots we have of your line with the stock on it and so on, it really does. I mean, you can look at those pictures and you have to double take before you realise they're not the real thing, so it clearly works.
That's also the camera technique, taking it from the right angles, but thank you, yes. I provide the raw material. I
mean, one of the things with outdoor models is that unlike an indoor railway, you can't control the whole thing, can you? With an indoor model railway, you've actually got artificial control over the whole miniature environment, whereas with the garden railways, perhaps we've got the extra conundrum, as we said, is that you are having to complement or compete with or match nature itself. So there's an extra problem to solve, which perhaps makes getting the technique right all the more important.
Yeah, hey, it's the same thing. I mean, if we have a model tree, we have a real tree in the garden, do you prune that tree to try and get nearer to the shape of the real thing? Or do you just say, well, it's a tree in a garden and I'll accept it the way it is? I think we tend to try and adjust, we tend to try and vary the effect of what is in the garden to produce a more realistic, I was going to say, illusion.
In a sense, are you saying that nature doesn't really scale weathering down very well?
I think that's true.
So it's really a question of how do you give Mother Nature a helping hand rather than, if you like, getting in her way?
Yeah. How do you put the sort of the effect of distance into a model?
To be honest, we could probably spend a whole series just looking at weathering. And who knows, on the Railway Channel one day that might happen. But my hope here is really to inspire you to have a go at some of these slightly more advanced or different techniques on your garden railway, just to try and take things that little bit further. Now, Andy, it's not really rocket science, is it? I mean, we've got the tools of your trade here, so perhaps you can talk us through them.
Yeah, certainly. First thing I'd say is I'm not one of those that goes in for spray technique. I haven't got facility to start with. You'd need really a spray booth and the equipment compressor and that, which I haven't got. But I found that using the techniques in the books and that and the other publications, that you can do quite a nice job just using brushes. I've got a range there of Humbrol paints. Now, to start with, although there's a large number there, you don't need many. Steer away from pure black, pure white. Go for a mixture of light grey, dark grey, and by using those and by mixing those, you've got enough to do most of the tasks you want to. I've got Humbrol thinner there, which is going to be quite useful, which we're going to use quite a lot. And then brushes. You can get different types of brushes. The main one that I use is one of these square-ended brushes. This one's about, 5mm wide. It's a fairly soft bristle, but don't go for an expensive one because you're going to be mistreating this. You're going to do the worst possible things you can think of to this paintbrush, and it's not going to last very long. So go for the cheaper end of the market because you're not going to get an awful lot of life out of it. Now the other tools and that, well, for example, this one here, I think it's a dentist tool.
I thought I recognised it.
Yeah, it's sort of thing that sort of strikes fear into you when you attend the dentist. But you can buy these very easily now at model exhibitions, even in model shops. And we're going to use that as a sort of an abrasive tool. There's a variety of them at different shapes. Once again, If you're starting out, you could use just a basic screwdriver. But like all these things, over time, if you pick up the better tools, you'll find that the effect at the end of the day is better.
Now, one of the things I've got my eye on is these rather handy little pallets. It's something I'm always scratching around for. But, what are these?
Well, you're going to like this because in order to obtain these, you have to go for the sort of cornetto type ice cream, because if you look at them, some of them have cardboard ends, avoid those, but you'll find a lot of them have these plastic ends, and they're very nice. So you both enjoy the ice cream, and you've also then got some modelling tools that you can use to mix your paints in.
So you could say it satisfies the palate in more ways than one.
You could, Ian, by all means.
Now, the range of paints you've got here is actually quite small. There's obviously lots of tins, but the colour range is quite small. I remember reading somewhere recently saying this is perhaps one of those slightly counterintuitive things, that you think looking at nature there's a whole wide range of colours, but in fact you probably need fewer than you might think.
Yeah, I think that's true. If you think about it, if you've got a dark wagon, let's say you've got a wagon that's painted black. Now, as time goes by, that's going to fade, isn't it? And it's going to move towards a grey through various shades. On the other hand, if you've got a wagon like this one, which is a red sort of colour, what's going to happen there is it gets dirty, it's going to gravitate through greys again. In a way, the two, you could think, in the end, would meet in the middle. But what we're seeking to do here, we've got some basic paints of various shades that we can mix in the palettes to give us that range of colours.
But one thing I do notice is that they all kind of tone nicely together.
Yeah. I've got some there that are rust-coloured. The basic colour that I use on my wagons is Humbrol number 70. So obviously that's one I start with. Now, as I say, that's the one I use, but you could use any colour to suit yourself. Other colours I use for coating stock is green. So obviously you'd start with that. But other than that, what I tend to do is, if I'm in a modelling shop, I'll pick up a couple of tins of grey, or if they have a sale on it, I'll buy a couple, and over time you just tend to widen the range.
Now, do you use the same range of colours across the whole of the wagon? I mean, if you look at some of the photos, for instance, you might find, am I right, that the rolling gear, the underframes and everything are actually slightly different from the bodywork?
Yeah, because if you think about it, what is weathering the plank, the timber work on the top of the wagon is going to be such things as the sun, as the rain. It's also going to be, say, soot from the locomotive, which will land on the top of the wagon. Conversely, at the bottom, you're going to get rust off the rail. You're going to get ballast dust. So you're going to have different colours, particularly on a van. If you're looking at an open wagon, which is quite low, you're not going to get so much from the soot and that. The other thing is the interior of the wagon is going to have a totally different experience, shall we say, to the exterior. For a start, very few companies, I think, actually painted the inside of their wagons. The outside was painted, the inside was left bare. And so you're going to, in there, you're going to start off with bare timber, which is then going to be exposed to the effect of weathering from the climate, but in addition from the goods that it carries. If you put coal in, it's going to leave a bit of a residue. If you put ballast in, if you put, let's say you put packing cases in, they're going to be slid across the surface of the wagon. They're all going to leave weathering effects in various forms.
The other thing that occurs maybe is that in terms of the outside, maybe the sides and the end are going to be a bit different as well.
Yeah, I think so, because let's say, I don't think we'd see this so much on narrow gauge, but certainly on the standard gauge trains that are travelling along at 40, 50 miles an hour, you're going to get quite a lot of spray. If we're looking at narrow gauge prototypes, these are probably travelling about 12, 15, 20 miles an hour, so I don't think you'd see it so much, but you would get some of it, wouldn't you? And I think some of the effects you see at the end of the wagon, you get two lines thrown up by the wheels of the wagon in front, and that would be something that you could show on the wagon. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Each part of the wagon is going to be affected in different ways.
You know, the more we talk about this, the more I can see there is in it. It just goes beyond what immediately meets the eye.
Yeah, it does. But you've got to start somewhere, and I think because of time constraints and that, if I talk you through a few basic techniques, we have to accept this is more an art than a science, and you can develop these. These are ones that I've sort of built up from reading and that, and ones I've tried out, and you'll do the same thing.
Go on, inspire me.
Right, I'll do my best. What I'm going to do initially, I've got a wagon here which has just got my basic Humbrol number 70 livery. So what I do to start out with, I make the wagon as it would be in virtually an as-new condition.
And can I do, this is a wooden kit, isn't it? Yeah.
This, I think, is a DJB wagon, which I bought second hand, and I've just had in a cupboard for a while. So I thought I could use it to demonstrate the technique. And what we're going to try and do, what I've done on the other side, is that's the effect we're looking at. I think we could class that as light weathering.
Certainly a difference.
Yeah. And you can do this very easily. This is not at all difficult. And even if you didn't want to go any further, you could achieve this without any trouble at all within a few minutes. The problem I've got with this wagon is that the base colour you can see here, which I've left, is a very dark red, very strong. I think this probably is car primer. I don't know what you think, but
this is perhaps one of these things, isn't it, where people go with what they think a wagon is going to look like, and perhaps the colours are too strong.
Yeah. What you'll find, although this is my base Humbrol 70, is it's going to change colour as we work on it. So I've got here a jar. All I've got within this is nothing complicated. I've taken one of the dark grey colours and I've added to it some Humbrol thinner. And some people, in fact, just use the thinners that they use to clean the brushes in, if it's a dark colour. And this is quite simple. What we're going to do, using the square-ended 5mm thickness brush, and this is where the kitchen roll comes in, is get a fair amount on there. And we're going to do what we call a wash in this wagon. We're going to take the brush. Now, I'm doing it vertically because if you think about it, rain is going to run from the top of the wagon down towards the bottom. And this, in effect, is producing what would happen when soot from the locomotive exhaust or dust in the atmosphere was carried down by rain onto the wagon side.
Now, it occurs to me that you're going to need to be patient and let your base coat dry, otherwise you're just going to presumably take that right off again with the thinners.
Yeah, absolutely right. The other thing is, I don't leave the thinners just sitting on there. What I do, I mentioned kitchen roll, this is the first, dab it back off again. Because what very often will happen is you'll get the thinners building up on the base line at the bottom and you'll end up with a straight line across. So, yeah, for the reason of melting the paint underneath and also for the effect, dab it back off. If you find that your paint's too thick, you can actually scrub it off. It doesn't matter. Try and do it in a vertical fashion, and you'll still produce that effect of rainwork.
Right.
Okay, so what we've done there, I've not done it to any great degree. I tend to do that 2 or 3 times on this to get the effect. Once again, putting it on, dabbing it off. But over time, you'll end up with this.
And it's a very dilute colour that you're using there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
it is.
very dilute.
And that's if you put it on too thick, you're not going to get the effect of the rundown on it. But what we've got there, we've got a wagon that's it's a little bit of service there. You've got a bit of basic dirt. You've not got any chips. You've not got any heavy build-up of weathering. That's okay, I think, for the bodywork. I think for the frames and the underside, we put a bit more on. Right. Because that's going to get spray. So once again, you if you're going to just do dry brushing, I think you put some quite heavy layers still on the frame there.
Same colour.
Yeah, basic. But this time really splash it on.
Right.
And you might, if you wanted to, add a bit more on the bottom. Because if you think about it, the bottom of the wagon, you're going to get the dirt washing down, and you're also going to get splashes from below. So I think the lower part of the wagon will tend to get the worst of the wear for that point of view. And if you just wanted a basically weathered wagon, that's all you need to do. I think what you do is you go over, you make certain it's got a fairly even spread, but there is a basically weathered wagon.
Do you go so far as to pick different panels out differently? For instance, occasionally you get things like a replaced plank or two, that kind of thing. Is that possible?
Yeah, of course it is. And I think what would happen, if you replace the plank, you might just end up with bare wood. Now, that would probably be a little bit difficult to replicate. But let's say that they then painted it back in the original colour. What you might do then is go back to your original, in this case Humbrol 70, and paint a new panel in.
Okay.
You'd have the effect then of a new panel, of a new plank. But yeah, that's your basic weathered wagon.
And the running gear goes in, you would do that in exactly the same way, just a different colour?
I think running gear, this has got, as you can see, I'm sort of changing the gear over, but I think running gear, you'd have to go for more for a rust effect, wouldn't you? If you think about it, you're going to get rust off the rail. So here I've got fairly dark grey. I've not gone for black. You might have said that these originally would have been painted black, but as I said, I tend to steer away from blacks because they're very difficult colours to weather correctly. I've gone for a dark grey on there. What I might do then is do a wash of, say, a rusty coloured paint. And that would then give you the effect of water splashing onto it. As I say, I've only done a basic here. What I would tend to do is, I think if you wanted to do further, you're going beyond the washing. I mean, the next step, which I'll show, I call this sort of stage 1 weathering. It's only very, very basic. We could say it's a wagon that's only briefly been out of the works. It's showing a little bit of wear and tear from the effects of the atmosphere. If we take it to the next stage, then we'll go for what we call dry brushing. I'll just move that wagon over here. Now what I've got another one which I got here. Now what I've done is I've given it the basic 70. It's another second-hand wagon. What I have done, it's got a white roof, and I would normally, as you'll see from my other wagons, dirty this down, grey it down. But I thought I'd leave the white on for now because I can show the dry brushing technique. And it's the dry brushing really which is the key to this. What we do, I'm going to take an ordinary tin of Humbrol. This is a fairly dark colour. Make sure it's well mixed. Kitchen roll again. Now, same brush in this instance, and the other thing I need is another sheet of kitchen roll. I mentioned we use a lot of this because what I'm going to do here, a bit of paint on the brush, but then I'm going to keep, see it's coming off.
Yes.
Now you see there, in effect, the paint, well, the brush is virtually dry. It's hardly any, you can't see any paint on there.
Okay.
But if you then go onto the wagon and you lightly brush it, in fact that's come out quite heavy. If we dry it down even more, you see there's paint coming on.
Right.
And that's the basic of dry brushing. It is just putting very little layer of paint on, and once again...
And it's also pulling the texture out quite nicely, isn't it?
Yeah. Kitchen roll, brush as much as it off it as you can until your brush is as dry, or virtually dry. There's hardly any paint on there. I'll come back to this, is mistreating the brush. And then on here, once again, it's a bit heavy, so we'll just get a bit of kitchen roll, polish it off again. And you can rub as hard as you like until you achieve the effect that you want. That's showing it very heavily on white, on brown, on the red. It won't show as much, but you put a bit on there. If anything, I've put a bit more on than I normally would, so you can see it. I mean, a dry brush, you really could, as I say, mistreat the brush, grind most of it away, and then rub it down.
And it strikes me you can actually get not only background effects there, but presumably some sort of specific staining or marking and these kind of things as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you for example, we come back to different parts of this van. You might go for a fairly light dry brush at the top. You might go a bit heavier at the bottom because it's getting splashed from the track below. But that's the basic technique. Now, what we then do, if I go back to the other wagon, is we layer it.
Right.
That has got just the one coat of paint on. I'll go back on the side of here. That's just one colour of dry brush.
Right.
On the inside, I've gone for the layering effect.
Yes, I can see.
Now, the inside, because it started as bare wood, it's very difficult. I find the inside of wagons much more difficult than the outside, but the technique is totally the same. And at this end, here I've done a base coat of grey, trying to sort of give the bare wood effect. And then I've started dry brushing. And as I go along the wagon, I've gone for different shades. I've started off with here a dark shade. I've then gone to a lighter grey, dry brush sat on. I've then gone to a brown, and as we come along, you see the depth.
Yes, indeed, yes.
And it's very much a case of the sort of more different shades you get in there, the more realistic I think it gets, because what you're going to do towards the end, once you've got a fair number of layers, a little bit of this sandpaper, and rub. Now what's going to happen there is you're going to introduce a graining effect. That's why don't go front to back. Go in the direction of the planking, unless your planking's front to back, but most plankings cross. And what you're also going to do is you're going to take off some of the upper layer, your top dry brushing level, of the top dry brushing coat. You're going to reveal some of the ones below.
Yes.
You're going to get mixing, and you get an effect there that it's graining, it's wood that's being stained by different materials.
Well, I think that weathering has to be about the most convincing I've seen. You know, the difference between those original commercial wagons that we started with and then going through these stages until we end up with something, you know, as sort of subtle as that, really is convincing. And putting that outside, I think it does have this desired effect of blending in with the nature, the natural weathering of outside. And it really does look like the real thing has just been out there and in use on the railway for weeks and months. So thank you very much for showing me those techniques. I think it really gives me lots to think about. I've got to go away and do this, I think, for the Lower Bryndale Railway. So far, I've really chickened out of doing this one, but I think you've persuaded me that this is the way to go.
I think the thing to do is start off in a fairly simple fashion, go for the light weathering, and then build up on that. And I think you'll find your own sort of adaptations of that But keep going back to your photographs. Try and sort of mimic what's going on there and build up your own techniques.
Thanks very much.